Predator 2 is a 1990 film directed by Stephen Hopkins. In the far-off future of 1997, Los Angeles is under siege by two rival gangs, the Colombian and Jamaican drug cartels. Lieutenant Michael Harrigan violently quells a criminal shootout and riot. On the rooftop, Harrigan notices the faint shimmer of an extraterrestrial predator. Harrigan and his fellow officers investigate both the gangs and the mysterious predator who is targeting the Colombians and Jamaicans for reasons unknown. Harrigan discovers that the federal government has been trying to stop his investigation because they are tracking the alien in hopes of gaining new technology. After the deaths of many officers, Harrigan has a final showdown with the predator. After his success, the others allow Harrigan to live and escape, presumably out of respect. Predator 2 is a maligned sequel, not given much of its due when it was initially released. Much of this is because it lives in the shadow of the iconic, testosterone-fueled, penis-measuring action hit that came before. I'm being a little facetious, but seriously, I love Predator. In recent years, Predator 2 has gained a cult following as a solid, if unspectacular, sequel. There is a lot to love about it. In an era in which we are crying out for more diversity, most of the main characters in this film are portrayed by people of color. Danny Glover plays the lead. Ruben Blades plays Detective Danny Archuleta. Maria Conchita Alonso plays Detective Leona Cantrell. All portrayed largely positively. This is not too surprising, as nearly half the main characters in the original film were people of color as well. Now, admittedly, when you look at all the criminals in Predator 2, well, I cannot justify the bizarre Jamaican stereotypes in this film. I'm not being overly sensitive either. They do nothing but smoke weed, sacrifice people in voodoo rituals, and cast chicken bones. These problematic aspects of the film notwithstanding, it's still a lot better in terms of diversity than we have in many mainstream movies today. That's not saying very much, but 26 years ago, I suppose we could consider this progressive. Also, it's refreshing to see a young woman in an action film that is never sexualized. She takes exactly zero crap from Bill Paxton's comic relief character.
Yeah. Like your last partner got shot? Well...
Science fiction, particularly hard sci-fi, often looks into the far-off future and speculates on new technology that is only theoretical at the time of its writing, or tries to predict what our conflicts will be like centuries after we are gone. But many science fiction films, especially American films in my experience, have this fascinating orientation, telegraphing the era in which it was made by looking at its more immediate concerns about the future, or emerging technologies. Usually down to the decade. The Day the Earth Stood Still was made in 1951, and it is distinctly early 50s, and not just because of the actors and their vernacular or anything like that. We are seeing a reaction only a few years prior to the world's introduction of nuclear power. America became the world's first nuclear superpower in 1945, and Russia followed in 1949. Simply watching The Day the Earth Stood Still and what it is obviously about, we can guess it was made only a couple years afterward, even without checking good old IMDb. An easy way to track this is with the different versions of Invasion of the BODYSNATCHERS. The first in 1956 had a Cold War Red Scare undercurrent. The second, in 1978, made following the Watergate scandal, has this conspiratorial tone. You know it was the late 70s even without looking at, say, fashion and hairstyles. Later and less popular versions of the film also instilled them with themes that were contemporary to when they were made, even though this is always the same story. 1990s science fiction had this preoccupation with the computer and the dangers of virtual reality. We know when Virtuosity was made almost to the year without having to look it up. Predator 2, though released in 1990, feels like the last big Hollywood science fiction film with a 1980s aesthetic and also theme. most notably the fear of what I affectionately call the sci-fi urban hellscape. In the 60s, 70s, and especially the 80s, crime in major cities rose in America. This is widely thought to be related to middle-class families leaving the cities for the newly created suburbs, slowly but surely over the course of those decades. Taking the money with them, and without money there is poverty, and poverty leads to the desperation of crime. It is significantly more complicated than that, but this is not an economics lesson.
Who the hell's in charge down here? The cops? They're outmanned, outgunned, and incompetent.
Anyway, with the rise in crime in major cities, we had a slew of sci-fi urban hellscape movies. Escape from New York in 1981, perhaps the most obvious commentary on urban crime and the police in ROBOCOP, as well as a subset that focused more on the corporate culture of the Reagan era like Running Man in '87 and They Live in '88. Predator 2, which began pre-production and writing in the tail end of the '80s but was released in the dawn of a new decade, is among the last of its breed. In the beginning of the film, Harrigan is fighting the two rival gangs himself. He's not in police riot gear, he just goes to war, as he says. He refers to the crime in the streets as in the shit, the way that some soldiers referred to their time in Vietnam. This connection is not new, as the original Predator takes place in the jungle as men are tracked by an unseen enemy they do not understand. Predator 2 retains that growing mistrust of government that began to rise in the Vietnam era and swelled through the 80s. We see Harrigan circumvented in doing his duty by powerful forces in the federal government. Admittedly, what he does is wildly insubordinate and dangerously reckless as it pertains to the civilian population, but that is also a sign of its times. We had a little more trust in our police officers then, even if that trust may have been misplaced. Harrigan can be seen as a hero then, but now he just feels like someone who should have been fired. This is the death rattle of the cop who breaks the rules but gets results character. Movies have conditioned us to believe that if only we could get rid of the bureaucracy and red tape, only then would criminals be brought to justice. But that is a terribly dangerous mindset outside of the realm of fantasy. Only psychotics are calling for less accountability for the police department. And yes, movies like Predator 2 are far-flung into the world of fiction, but it might be telling that characters like Harrigan satisfy a desire in the audience.
Cooperation is my middle name.
Predator 2 is extremely violent to showcase its urban hellscape setting. The NC-17 rating was actually created the year Predator 2 was released, and the film was initially given that rating until the studio made some cuts to get it down to R. If Predator 2 did make one accurate prediction about the future of America, it was that of the militarization of the police. In the film, the battle between the Los Angeles Police Department and the two rival gangs is considered a war, and their use of lethal force with military-grade weaponry is shown and portrayed as justified, which is really creepy. That's where Predator 2's predictive powers end, though. The film did not anticipate that crime actually would begin to fall nationwide not long after its debut in 1990. Sci-fi visions of the future are not always accurate, after all. Statistically, violent crime has been on a steady decline since the 1990s, no matter what lies that fear-mongering news organizations and garbage monsters will tell you. The sci-fi urban hellscape is not the standard in American science fiction films anymore. After the VR and internet-related films of the 90s and the post-9/11 sci-fi, we're now actually seeing more encouraging, spacefaring films populate the genre, which I hope says something about our optimism for the future. Thanks for watching the latest episode of Renegade Cut, everyone. If you want to support the show, you can click the orange link to my Patreon. That's how all of this happens. If you want to subscribe and never miss an episode, click on the red link. If you want to watch more, there are some recommended videos below. I'll see you next week for another episode.